Over the years, alternative investments as an asset class has been gaining huge momentum. Taking note of this, AIWMI and Centrum Wealth Management put together the second Alternative Investment Summit in Mumbai recently. The event kicked off with a welcome address delivered by Aditya Gadge, the CEO of AIWMI.
Alternative investments have seen an increasing depth in the last few years with improving market infrastructure and product offerings. We believe that it is just the right time for us to set up a forum to get all the decision makers together and deliberate on more strategic issues on the way forward.
Following the welcome address, Anant Barua, the Executive Director of SEBI, highlighted the alternatives in the new regulatory environment.
As we know, after this financial crisis, there is a total change of as far as the regulations are concerned. The way the regulations earlier was that the market was supreme. After 2008, it has undergone a change. And now the mandate for every regulator is to see whether if there is any activity which is being done, whether that activity, if unregulated, will pose systemic risk. Gradually, what is happening, more and more people are trusting these asset managers for investing the fund. But what is happening actually, because the banks and others, they are not investing in a risky or SME products, that gap is being fulfilled by these asset managers. So naturally, when the size grows and as I said earlier, if it becomes systemically important, then other regulations, they come in and they step in. But here we have a different regulatory parameter for the different industry. And we see that the regulations regulation should be such, it should not stifle the innovations and the market for which it has been made.
The event also saw several discussions diverse alternative investment strategies in the market. The last discussion, moderated by Arpita Vinay, the Director of Centrum Wealth Management, focused on improving asset allocation and achieving tax efficiency with alternative investments.
Before we get specific to AI, what do you think are the broad macro environment trends that you've seen? What do you foresee as trends at the margin on regulation side?
Industry has been pretty old now, yes. And what I saw way back in the mid-90s and early 90s, today's scene has changed a lot, okay? So we have deep management expertise today. Unfortunately, we have not actively encouraged management industry so much. If we remove some of those hurdles, that itself is an incentive. We're not asking for anything else. For example, pass-through. Nowhere in the world I have seen pass-through as an issue even. UK, US, Singapore, wherever you go, it is non-issue. Here it's a major issue. Whereas first meeting, somewhere in mid-90s, at Chandrasekhar committee, we had recommended pass-through and it was given. Now pass-through is not given. It already exists in the law. If some of you know technical section 61 to 63, revocability, as well as 161 to 164 sections, they clearly, if you comply with those, there is already a pass-through. All that people are asking that, please do not trouble at a lower level. Other thing that I see, those just coming back to the trends, I'm seeing huge amount of interest in India again. Last year, some private equity firms like Summit Partners, and they wound up from India practically. They say it's no longer worth looking at it. Suddenly everybody is looking back. She mentioned I addressed some 150, 200 GPs and other people. They are very enthusiastic, but most of them, lot of them are waiting at the door to get the things cleared. Now, who will invest as a foreign investor if you do not have a pass-through status here? They will say rather we come directly. Other thing is that in terms of trends, what we see, even LPs are becoming more cautious. They want to come often directly now. Okay, that's management fees are under great pressure within the US, and the same trend would also happen here. Other thing that we are seeing is that the new style of now writing PPM. So far we saw that, you look at SEBI regulations and articulate of PPM in light of the SEBI regulations and the disclosures and stuff like that. Now when you have investors coming particularly from the Europe you know. You have to look at AIFMD regulations. We need to now move up the value chain in the way in which you do your PPMs. That also becomes a marketing document because your standards need to go up next. And finally, a point in terms of fund directors. We have seen a lot of interesting developments lately. In last couple of years, there was judgment in from Cayman Grand Court, and $111 million per director were awarded to the LPs, because they say that as a director you don't necessarily have to attend meetings and do it, but what is more important is also what you do in between the meetings. Okay, so those things are coming up.
The whole point on the certainty and clarity of the regime, especially on the tax and the regulatory side, gets me, sir, to you, Mr. Pranav Saita. What do you think, and the point that Mr. Desai mentions, that may not be so much of ambiguity, but perhaps it does not trickle down to the lowest level of people who are interpreting and executing it. How do you think we deal with this?
I really would put this into two baskets, two broad baskets. One is the regime, the law, the regulation as it stands today. And I do feel there's a lot that can be done to bring about clarity, certainty in the tax regime. And the other, of course, is the bucket of how well that law is administered, how fairly, how reasonably the law is administered at the ground level. The sad part is, on the one hand, the government does accept the fact that they want to bring about stability and predictability in the tax law, certainty and clarity in the tax law, a non-adversarial, taxpayer-friendly regime, and so on. But I don't see right now the regime still being completely clear as to how such investors are going to be taxed. When it comes to AIFs, we are told that category 1 venture capital undertaking investments will clearly get a pass-through benefit. That is very clear, and hopefully that's done and dusted. But there's a whole lot of the others, category 2 or even in category 1, the remaining category 3. We are not too sure right now what the government's thinking is on how these are going to be taxed. Clearly, when there is no pass-through specifically provided in the law itself, as is the case for category 1 venture capital undertaking investments, taxpayers have tried to ensure that they fall within a regime which has been in place for several decades, and try to structure themselves as a fixed and determinate trust and say that taxation has to therefore be in the like manner and to the same extent as is applicable to the beneficiaries. The result, however, has been that the regime itself has been litigating on the point as to whether this particular trust is really a fixed and determinate trust, and whether it therefore qualifies for that benefit or it is a discretionary trust taxable at the maximum marginal rate. To add to the confusion, right now the circular seems to say that the names of the beneficiaries and the exact beneficial interest of each should be specified in the original trust deed at the time of creation itself. I'm not too sure that the exact nuances of how this business is conducted has been fully appreciated. And so long as there is a clarity on who gets how much and there is a clear formula provided in the trust deed, what can be the objection of the revenue? I don't really understand why there should be an objection. So one, I would feel that clarity will go a long way in improving the business environment. So I think if adequate representations are made by all stakeholders put together, that here is a situation where there is no problem in paying one layer of tax, no one disagrees with that, and everyone seems to agree that double taxation is not intended, then that's where we need to go. And a clear definition of what the pass-through status will be, especially where the investor is coming from a treaty jurisdiction which is non-taxable. What the maximum marginal rate would be, especially if it's a long-term capital gain which is subject to tax at a much lower rate. All these things create a lot of uncertainty, and given the way in which our administrative setup is, which is not always the most fair and reasonable at the ground level, a very clear legislation and regulation with the circular from the highest level of the tax authority, I think would go to a very large extent and to a long way in promoting investments in this sector.
The industry is sort of struggling with how to go about interpreting between the circular and the precedent that was there.
Right.
And on taxation, Tushar, you also amongst one of the go-to guys handling about the majority of taxation issues in AIF. This is something I'm sure you've been questioned a lot on. What would be your take on that?
The key of the crux of the issue, if you see, we are dealing with alternative investment,
Right.
which effectively, as a fund manager, you are in a fiduciary capacity. You're managing third-party money. So your ability to take risk as such and your ability to get into litigation as such is very minimal. Issue is that the alternative investment regime requires that level of certainty from the government in terms of manner with the taxation of the whole industry works. Now, other issue is that the government need to understand the role the alternatives play in the economic development. Now today, the alternatives in terms of private equity and venture capital promotes entrepreneurship. Today, the guys where the venture capital is funding or the private equity is funding is the guys who are not able to raise bank finance. And that's a mode of capital. Now you look at the Flipkart story or a Snapdeal story, you could say from where the whole growth of the industry happened because of the alternative funding. Now, in respect of fund managers, also today, as you may be aware in terms of offshore fund, a lot of these fund managers are sitting in places like Singapore or outside India. And if you ask the fund manager, the main issue is tax, why they're sitting abroad.
Mr. Maheshwari, I'm coming to you now. What's been the thinking behind it? Because, when you were exploring the various places that you could be present in, why would you choose one or the other? And at the margin, how do you see things panning out?
So I would probably touch upon the issue as to why L&T got into this space as a GP. So at one end, L&T has put up prop projects, as we call it. We have a prop book with about 30,000 crores of project investments. And equity now valued at about 10,000 crores. We've had, over a period of last 10 or 15 years, a return over net worth of about 14 to 16%. Okay. And these are hardcore infrastructure projects. So we had managed our own money. So that was one experience on the equity side. One of the key set of clients that we've been focusing on for the last 7, 8 years are what I call as emerging players. And we realized that these emerging players, so on the client side, there was a requirement that they needed equity. And they felt that participation by somebody like L&T in their equity actually brings them up in the financial system and gets them better access to more equity and more debt. So that's how we said we will use our project finance experience, which again, by the way, takes 10 to 15-year calls, just like private equity does, and our own prop equity experience, and try and marry that knowledge and create an equity fund. We said, look, infra funds are really 10-year funds. But investors are probably looking for smaller tenors also. And we saw there is another opportunity in real estate. And we introduced another class where we saw there's a lot of mezz opportunity. We think there are a lot of good emerging players who feel that the markets will be better and they might get better valuation. But they are willing to go for mezz, and that returns that we are able to get out of that are good enough for certain class of investors who are looking at short. So essentially we said we would offer, now there's a market demand, but there's also a demand from the liability side, or let's say the contributors side, the investors side. That is, we are able to give them products between 5 to 10 years. And so if somebody wants to invest with us as a fund manager, 100 crores, probably he could do 30, 30, 30 in 3 different kind of portfolios and look at his portfolio. So I think that was one of the key things that we looked at, and we have entered into this. It's still an easier, a fairly new beginning, but we've started to book assets. We said, okay, we'll commit our own money and we'll start booking assets and we'll look for investors later on. So that's one. Just one last bit, I think, since we talked about investors, I'll just touch upon that actually in this entire space, there are a lot of fund managers who probably are willing, because the investors obviously want some returns, probably end up overcommit themselves in return. And I think that's what happened with several investors who who have gone, they've committed, and they're today not able to give threshold returns. So I think it's very important for investors to actually discern the right fund managers, because there is something, there is a credibility thing as to what is the minimum threshold I want, but somebody is promising me great, you need to think about how is that guy actually going to deliver. So I think one of the problems that seem to have happened in the last few years with several investors not getting the kind of expected return is that they fell for the mirage of very high returns promise. I think so that's one. And the last thing on the government thing which we talked about when we talked to international investors, the guys overseas, in the time India got its act messed up, we drove money away from India to Indonesia. You have to remember that global investors, and now even Indian family offices are kind of approaching global investors. They look at investing overseas. If industrialists, were kind of family offices anyway, and Indian high net worth individuals start thinking that India is not safe enough and we need to invest overseas, I think we are missing the bus. Somewhere the economic policy and desire to have more investment and the revenue orientation that we have at the implementation level, as it's been said, it is not synchronous, and realizes that while we may be wanting to earn more, in the long run we are earning less because we are driving away investors elsewhere. So I think India has to remember that it's just another product in the World Committee of Nations.
I'm now coming to you, sir, Mr. Patni. First on specific, because a lot of us in the room are also the financial intermediaries and would like to understand, in terms of the experience with AI and in terms of you leading the family office piece, what are the considerations that go in? Are you comfortable with the due diligence? Are you comfortable with what you see there? Would you have the confidence to go ahead? And therefore, if you were to look at the landscape currently, what is it that sounds exciting for you to actually go ahead and commit capital?
In the last few years, there have been a lot of products which have come on the alternative investments. Of course, traditionally, you had the PMSs where we had the equity PMS, which we looked at, where you could see the track record of the fund manager if he was performing well, and then he was doing the correct stock picking, you would back him. That slowly has come in-house with the family offices which are large enough to have their own fund manager. Although we yet run external PMSs, but we also have our own stock picking. And then there have been a lot of alternative products which have come in the market, on the derivatives, the hedge fund, you have the Nifty futures which we have done, the silver and gold arbitrage commodities. But many of these products have not really performed that well because the market in India on derivatives is very small, and I don't think they are growing large enough to be able to really give a consistent return as would the international markets give. One of the issues which we see in the alternative investments is the exits are not happening, because India, we have seen only last 10 years where a lot of funds are yet not exited fully. And so we don't know whether, what will be the real track record, because unless they return money back. That has been one of the apprehensions the family offices have, when the money is going to come back. Also, private equity and venture fund, they are locked in. So there's another issue which family offices have. They don't like to see a lock-in. So some of the new AIFs which have come on the liquid side, they are probably doing better because there's a monthly redemption or quarterly redemption. The problem in India, as all of you have mentioned, is that there are too many products out there, and we are not able to. I would say one of the main issues is how do we, which I have been working on since the last many years, how do I diversify my portfolio into a global portfolio? I think that is one of the key concerns which I have, is with the rupee which will go on depreciating with the high import content which India has, and the high dependence on balance of payments. And I think dollar is going to remain a strong currency over the next couple of decades. So as an investor, how do I diversify my portfolio where it is a global asset base and I'm not dependent fully on India? Because in India, again, there is a limitation what you can do, and there are a lot of constraints. You have a tax regime, you have execution risk, you have changing policies. I think that is also one of the considerations which one has to look from the government angle, is how to make it more proactive for us, because otherwise you will find that you will have so many fund managers in India selling local products, but you will have limitations on how well you can do them.
If we can close with your comments on what is the wish list for the industry. There seems to be a lot of optimism in terms of money that can come in, clarity, and everything gets talked about.
Yeah, about 3 or 4 points. Number one, a pass through, we talked about it a lot. There's a clear expectation. It's no go otherwise, Number two, as far as foreign investors are concerned, clarity on PE. Okay, that there will be no unnecessary, charge of having a PE and therefore taxation of those entities. So that's a second thing that we see. Third is, I think, expectation of the industry is that now we should also open up in a manner, even approvals for investment in the Indian AIF is also a little bit of an issue. At times you have to go to FIPB and stuff like that. We need to clear up those kind of hurdles. And finally, it's a little, unrealistic in some ways, but there is a need for Indian venture capital funds and private equity funds to be allowed to invest in overseas assets. Today, that is another thing that is, because you need to learn how to invest abroad, you need to diversify risk and those kind of things.
And from an allocation point of view, what is it that you're hearing on alternative assets from an interest point of view?
Right, so increasingly we've been seeing that Indian families are looking to invest in a structured manner in this space as well, whereas traditionally they have never really gone about investing in this space. I think increasingly they are realizing that there is an opportunity here, and if we give more clarity, certainty, if we give it some form of structure, I think that can be taken forward to a very large extent. The point to be noted here is, apart from the fact of reward, returns and so on, the most important, and apart from the fact that it's a method of asset allocation, diversification in some sense from the same routine liquid markets or mutual funds, whatever. The main point really is India has always been traditionally a very capital-starved country on the one hand. And on the other hand, I feel one of the key features of the Indian ecosystem is the rich base of entrepreneurs. Now, if we put these two together, a capital-starved country and a rich base of entrepreneurs, really one has to tap this well in order to unleash India's full potential. So I think it's already started. If we provide the right framework, the right regime, I think it will go a long way in promoting India's growth.
With that, I think we've come to the end of this panel discussion. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for your time and a very, very valuable, insightful discussion here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.